a controlled burn of dangerous chemicals and the mandatory evacuation of some 2,000 people. This tragic incident is a reminder of the importance of following the golden rule and treating other people the way we would like to be treated if we were in their shoes. Today's hearing is an opportunity to put ourselves in the shoes of those impacted by this disaster, examine the immediate response, and ensure long-term accountability for the cleanup efforts. It's our responsibility in Congress to answer, one, what went wrong? Two, what do we need to do to fix it? What do we need to do to make sure it never happens again? Every so often, environmental disaster in our country underscores our responsibility to protect public health and our environment. In 1969, I recall seeing news coverage of a train spark that ignited the polluted Cuyahoga River near Cleveland, Ohio, just north of Ohio State, where I was a Navy ROTC midshipman a year earlier. As our nation watched a river engulfed in flames, it served as a wake-up call to better protect communities from hazardous substances and to take responsibility for cleaning up environmental disasters. This movement helped lead to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, which has broad bipartisan support, broad bipartisan support. My hope is that in the aftermath of the disaster in East Palestine, we can come together once again to identify solutions that will protect communities, improve safety, and restore trust. We must work together with our colleagues on other relevant House and Senate committees to strengthen our nation's rail safety regulations, ensure compliance with them, and prevent future incidents like this one from happening again. We also need to make sure that the impacted communities receive the resources and the support that they need. Our existing laws have allowed EPA to identify Norfolk Southern as a responsible party and began to hold the corporation responsible for the costs of the emergency response, as well as for the long-term remediation of this area. We want to hear from our witnesses today whether Norfolk Southern is meeting its obligations, including its moral obligations. In addition, we should note that responding to this disaster is a shared responsibility between different levels of government and Norfolk Southern. And it is imperative for us to ensure that the agencies tasked with responding to disasters like this have the necessary resources that they need to ensure the safety of the air that people breathe, the water they drink, and the soil they use on which to grow crops. It's worth noting that the Biden administration has been on the ground from day one. As we'll hear today, the EPA, working alongside state and local partners, arrived in East Palestine within hours after the derailment and has maintained a presence ever since. In fact, Administrator Regan has visited the area, I'm told, some 3 times already and expects to go back for more. In the wake of the chemical releases, these government entities have worked tirelessly to install air and groundwater monitoring systems, as well as sample the water in the air for toxics and oversee the removal of contaminated soil. Norfolk Southern appears to have cooperated with these orders and has agreed to pay for the environmental cleanup resulting from the derailment. However, the ultimate costs may exceed the immediate cleanup needs. And moreover, an apparent lack of transparency on the part of Norfolk Southern, at least in the early days of the response, has left some members of the community battling with mistrust and looking for answers. We're told that the company's failure to communicate directly includes information given to some first responders who were under the impression that only 1 car would be vented and burned rather than 5. And this miscommunication left first responders scrambling to ensure the public safety requirements of a much, much larger plume. We've also heard from some residents who were told it was safe to return to their homes, but are still experiencing ongoing health problems. Other concerns remain, such as loss of property values and the long-term impacts on the most vulnerable citizens, including children and the elderly. As I said earlier, today presents us with the opportunity to learn from this experience, address misinformation, and gain a better understanding of the long-term plan to protect public health and address the environmental impacts of this disaster. Just as we witnessed an earlier environmental disaster in Ohio 54 years ago that I've alluded to, a new generation of Americans is now waiting to see how their government responds today and in the days to come. This incident may well prove to be a defining moment in their lives as it was in my own. Let's do what's right, not only for the people of East Palestine, but for everyone who believes that those who transport potentially dangerous chemicals must take the necessary steps to protect our people and our one and only planet. And with that, let me turn over the rest of the opening statements here to my ranking member and my partner in so many ways, Senator Capito. Senator Capito.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here today. And I'm really pleased that we have the hearing and we have our fellow senators here with us as well. As you said, we're going to discuss the ongoing environmental response to a large-scale chemical spill resulting from a Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, which is 14 miles north of the West Virginia border. Before we go any further, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the emergency responders who were on the scene and less than an hour after the incident was reported and are continuing today to work diligently on our cleanup efforts. Thank you all so much. These kinds of accidents are some of the toughest days for them because these men and women, these are their neighbors. These, in some cases, they're relatives, and certainly their hometown friends. So it weighs on all of us here. This catastrophe upended the lives of thousands of our constituents in states represented today. The residents of East Palestine and other impacted communities, including those in West Virginia, deserve the chance to hear publicly from those involved in and affected by the cleanup efforts. They need to know what progress has been made, the challenges that lay ahead, and what lessons can be learned to improve future responses. From day one, responders across all levels of government, as well as the private sector, have worked around the clock on monitoring and mitigation to keep the public and environment safe. I appreciate EPA and other relevant organizations for providing regular updates to Congress on the status of the response. However, I want to convey to all of you that the public deserved a better level of transparency and much, much sooner. A month after the accident, it's clear to me that EPA's risk communication strategy fell short. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, impacted communities were clamoring for answers. While we're well aware that monitoring efforts and response planning need to be sound, we need to understand why it took so long for the EPA to get accurate data to the public. This is especially true when organizations like the Ohio EPA and the Ohio River Valley Sanitation Commission, better known as ORSENCO, both represented on our panel today, managed to provide data and safety information to the public quicker. That even includes they were distributing EPA data faster than the agency itself was willing to, not only with the public, but also during briefings and conversations with the affected congressional offices. In the absence of adequate transparency to the public, that just opens up a gap for social media, armchair citizen scientists, and political pundits on both sides to fuel false narratives that have further undermined that public confidence in the response to the derailment. With each week passing, the confusion seemed to grow. Even after weeks of repeated air, soil, and water monitoring have shown levels of the implicated contaminants of magnitude well below the ATSDR and EPA levels of concern in the air and water, the initial delays in messaging and response has meant that the residents still do not trust these results enough to feel safe. And trust is essential in these situations. That has been made worse, I think, by a lot of the misinformation that we've seen. You can't address fear and mistrust by pointing residents to an EPA website filled with fact sheets and press releases. Risk communications needs to be done in a clear but compassionate, relatable manner right down there where it's happening. So why did it take weeks for the EPA administrator to drink the water he repeatedly told residents was safe? Why did it take almost a month to establish a response center and go door to door to East Palestine families concerned? As a result of early missteps, I believe that we need to keep moving forward here. This committee must get to the bottom of whether EPA has some of the authorities for some of the actions that it's taken on the removal and whether they are serving the best interests of our constituents. So how will EPA approving every shovelful of dirt that is moved benefit safety or expedite the process? These are the questions I'm going to have. How and why is EPA prohibiting contaminated soil and water from leaving the state of Ohio for into qualified destruction facilities? How's that going to improve outcomes? I'm concerned that at least one of the Ohio facilities EPA is now activating for this purpose has a history of Clean Air Act violations and may not be able to sufficiently destroy contaminated soils in a way that assures communities may not be further impacted by emissions resulting from incomplete incineration. So, the EPA has been slow to respond to some of our office's inquiries on the use of PFAS firefighting foams in combating the fire, nor explaining how residues from those foams may be responsible for some of the purported pollution that has made the rounds. The EPA could have also made abundantly clear that Norfolk Southern would be completely liable and that no expense would be spared in the cleanup efforts that's required by the law. Instead, it took weeks for the average American not well versed in the nuances of